The brand new RTX 4070 has landed, but is Nvidia's latest and greatest GPU actually worth the money? Well, in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look, building the best 4070 build I can put together to evaluate how well this performs in the latest titles when compared to all of the other GPU options currently on the market. So let's dive in, shall we, and see if the 4070 is actually a card worth considering. Now, the purpose of today's video is to primarily do two things. First, evaluate how good the RTX 4070 really is, and second, to show what kind of build you should put together if you're considering buying this GPU. Now, the first thing I want to touch on is actually the size of this card. It is deceptively small. Now, to demonstrate this, I'll pop it side by side with a 4080 and 4090, but a comparison I've found to be even more striking is actually to this, a 5-year-old RTX 2060. Now, if you look here, these two cards are basically the same size, making the 4070 already a much more viable upgrade option for users looking to add it in to their existing builds. And the size isn't the only thing that seems to stack up well here. With a $599 MSRP, that's $200 less than the 4070 Ti and half the price of a 4080, Nvidia are clearly trying to be competitive here. With 12GB of GDDR6X video memory, plenty of CUDA cores, and the latest gen of RT and Tensor cores for improved ray tracing and DLSS 3 performance, it all sounds a bit too good to be true. How achievable that $599 MSRP will actually be is yet to be determined, and I'm hearing that add-in board partners like ASUS, MSI, and GeekaWhat will once again fail to hit that MSRP in the majority of their range, and not because they want to rip people off by making a fortune on the 4070, but because they say they can't really make much money on their MSRP designs. Nvidia can afford to meet MSRP more easily, as they of course make the cooler and the board, giving them full control over the whole process. But that is, I suppose, a rant and a story for another day. Now, if we've got the 4070 and it is indeed as good as we're hoping it to be, what are the parts that I would go ahead and pair it up with? Now, in terms of the CPU, you've obviously got a couple of new options out from the Team Red AMD, but I think Intel's Core i5-13400F is the CPU I'm going to go with to start. With Intel's latest P&E cores, performance and efficiency cores, decent clock speeds, and a pretty tame TDP, it helps to keep this build fairly modest. And the motherboards that are available, including this ASUS TUF Gaming B760 Plus, are actually a piece cheaper than some of their AMD counterparts. Something which gets even better when you consider they support DDR4 memory. Great for those who've already got some DDR4 lying around that will work well, and potentially good for those looking to find a cheap RAM deal either on the new or the used markets. In terms of the memory that I've gone for, I've just picked up 16 gigs of Corsair's Vengeance RGB RS. You might find 32GB will be better for the 4070, but that's a test we're going to look at later, while a 1TB WD Black SSD will keep our storage nice and nippy. Of course, the requirement for cases in this instance is much more tuned down. I've gone for this Cooler Master Masterbox 520 design with tempered glass and plenty of RGB fans. A 240mm cooler from DeepCool completes the build, keeping our Intel chip nice and chilly, and of course is a great budget option for both a non-overclockable CPU but also an unlocked K-series chip for those looking to push their CPU that bit further on, of course, the right compatible motherboard. So with all of that said, let's build this PC and see just whether the RTX 4070 really cuts the mustard as far as performance goes. I've always been a pretty big fan of the ASUS TUF Gaming range, especially since they removed all that yellow that used to be on them many years ago. The stealthier black designs are much more to my taste. If you look at this board, we've got plenty of VRM cooling, even though the CPU isn't going to be overclocked today, a decent I/O with 20 and 10GB USB-C, 2.5GB Ethernet, and Wi-Fi 6 for super fast connectivity. You'll also find widespread PCIe Gen 5 support, not that our graphics card actually needs it anyway, and of course room for up to 4 DDR4 memory modules. The first order of business is installing the processor, so just lift the arm up, release the socket, and drop the chip into place nice and easily. Add in the cover before returning the arm into place to lock the CPU down. RAM is going to be next, so the 16 gig kit of Corsair's Vengeance RGB RS. Pull back the DIMMs on the second and fourth slots, slide the RAM into place, bit of pressure to either side, and we should be good to go. While I'm here, I'm also going to pop in the M.2 NVMe SSD. You can see WD's black SN850 I discussed a bit earlier. To do this, I'll need to grab a slightly smaller screwdriver than normal to remove the top NVMe M.2 slot. So that's this slot just here. You get these nice heat spreaders included on this board as standard, meaning you haven't got to opt for drives with a heatsink, but if you like the aesthetic, you can also take these heat spreaders off and add in a drive that does include a heatsink instead. Specifically, that's what I'll be opting to do today by just dropping in WD's black drive just here, a little something like so. The toolless M.2 installation clip then slides over and we're pretty much good to go. At this stage of the build, before moving this into the case, I am going to do a little bit of prep for the CPU cooler by just adding on the backplate and a couple of screws around our 13th gen processor. Doing this now makes your life a bit easier, as once the motherboard is in the case, it is obviously a little bit more tight and a little bit more tricky. And then once that's wrapped up, we can remove the toolless side panel on the case, go about taking off the rear panel as well for good measure, and lay the case down flat to install the motherboard into place. All of the standoffs here seem to be in the right place, meaning we can go ahead and just screw the motherboard straight into place. No worries whatsoever. I can also pop the radiator in at this stage, so just going to add my 2 DeepCool fans just here before screwing the rad and the fans onto the top of the case. The water block is next up, a little dab of thermal paste on the CPU before fastening the water block itself into place. It just hovers over each of the 4 silver posts and secures down with a thumb screw in each corner. In terms of power, I'm also going to add in Corsair's CX650F RGB. From what I understand, this 200 watt card recommends a 650 watt power supply. And while I'd like to have used a Cooler Master one to keep this build nice and cohesive, Corsair actually kindly sent over their new Type 4 to PCIe Gen 5 power adapter. The Founders Edition uses that new ATX 3 standard. Some of the other cards use regular 8 pins, so just bear in mind which yours has and try and make sure you can get a nicer looking cable than the stock Nvidia adapter, just to clean things up a little bit. In terms of the power supply though, it is modular, so you only have to plug in the cables you actually need, helping to keep cable management to a minimum. I'll be adding in these easy DIY fab cable extensions too for the motherboard and CPU area, which I'll link on my Amazon storefront down in the description below. And then we can finally put the graphics card in. I'm so excited for this bit of the build, and I think the system is actually looking pretty good. Now, I'm going to hover the GPU over the PCI lane just to decipher which of the brackets need removing. So by the looks of things, it's the second, if I can pull it out, and the third. Lovely stuff. I can't actually quite get over how small this thing is by comparison to other next-gen cards, but I do quite like it. I'm glad that the return of small GPUs is finally here. Here we go. Slide it in, click it into place. Look at that. Oh, I really like it. And then finish things off with the nice, sleek PCIe Gen 5 power cable. Take out the slack. Oh yes, we have ourselves the first ever 4070 build on the channel, but the important bit is coming. How well does this graphics card perform? I'll rejoin you in a few moments to test this out in real time, but first, why don't we boot this thing up, see how good it looks, and celebrate in the only way we know how. Roll that montage. Taking a look at performance, and we're going to test over 10 of the latest and most popular titles on the 4070 to see how it stacks up. The first I want to look at is Modern Warfare 2 Remastered. I feel like this is generally a really good benchmark to use, and if you look, I'm going to run it for the purposes of this test at 4K with all of our quality settings cranked to high and ultra. I'll be looking at 1440p numbers shortly afterwards, but for now, this should give us an indicative idea of the kind of performance you can expect. Straight away then, we're sitting at 125, 130 FPS on average at 4K on a 4070. Wow, of course you could supercharge this frame rate even higher if you drop down to 1440p. And it has to be said that this card is mightily impressive. Now, of course, this frame rate will drop slightly in areas of high action, but it still delivers very similar frame rates to the 4070 Ti, way higher than the 3080 and 3070 from last gen, and even beats out the previous gen's top-end 3090 GPUs. It really is an incredible showing here. And I'm hoping these good results will carry on through into the likes of Apex Legends. Let's take a look, shall we, at the video settings here. Let's run at 4K, basically high settings across the board. Take a look at that frame rate in the top left-hand corner. Let's do a game of trios, and let's have a look and see what the frame rates are going to be like in Apex. That was an early kill that I didn't expect to have to make. Oh my goodness, I hardly even had a bleeming gun and I've had to kill a man already. Frame rate though looks pretty good, 130 FPS so far. Oh, this has gone from bad to worse. The whole squad's come after me after the early kill on their teammate. But the point is, frame rate was strong, 130, oh my goodness. 130 FPS. Now, if you look at this on a graph, it marginally falls short to the $2,000 or $1,500 3090 Ti from last gen and beats out the RTX 3090. It obviously leaves for dust the 3070 and 3080, arguably this card's two closest rivals as far as price to performance goes, showing that the 4070 is shaping up already to be a phenomenal value option for its $599 MSRP. These, of course, though, aren't the only games we tested on this system. So let's take a look next, shall we, at Warzone 2. We tested here at both 4K and 1440p, and let's start off with that higher resolution test first of all. At 4K, this card delivered 108 frames per second on average, breaking the 100 FPS barrier and falling short only to the more expensive 4070 Ti. The 108 frames per second counter also beat out last gen's 3080, 3080 Ti and 3090, with the 4070 only falling short to last gen's 3090 Ti by 9 frames per second. That makes the 4070 a very compelling value option so far. At 1440p, the good results carried on rolling through, with the RTX 4070 beating out the much more expensive last gen 3080 and 3080 Ti. With 3 FPS lower than the more expensive 4070 Ti, it once again showed itself to be exceptional value, only falling short to the last gen 3090. Even cards like AMD's 7900 XTX, a $1,000 GPU costing at MSRP $400 more than this card, only delivered another 8 or 9 frames a second, giving even AMD some stiff competition with this new Nvidia mid-level entrant. At Fortnite, tested at 1080p competitive settings, the 4070 once again delivered 288 frames per second, beat out all of last gen's offerings barring the 3090 Ti, and fell short to the more pricey 4070 Ti by only 7 FPS. I couldn't really recommend the 70 Ti to anybody at its current price point when you consider how good the 4070 non-Ti performs. In Battlefield 2042, it massively impressed, falling short to the 4070 Ti by a measly 1 frames per second and lacking against the 4080 by just 2. Here, AMD and Nvidia's top-end cards took a pretty compelling lead, with the 4070 showing itself to be a bit of a respectable underdog. Move through to 4K and the 4070 stacks up well again, 93 FPS here, falling short only to last gen's 3090 Ti and of course the more expensive current gen counterparts. I also of course tested out Formula 1 2022 with a wide range of different settings. At 1440p using the ultra high preset with DLSS 3 enabled and no ray tracing, the card delivered 216 FPS, dropping down to 184 FPS at 1440p ultra high with ray tracing enabled. Tune up to 4K ultra high with DLSS 3 and no ray tracing and you can expect 104 FPS, while enabling that RTX goodness dropped us down to 103. This just goes to show that this card also delivers pretty solid DLSS 3 and ray tracing performance, as well as solid straight rasterization performance across the board. Our next title is a slightly older game, but nevertheless a good one to test out. It is of course GTA 5, and at 1440p high, the 4070 beat out everything from the last generation from both AMD and Nvidia, including the 3090 Ti and 6950 XT. It obviously fell short of the 4080, 7900 XTX and RTX 4090, as is to be expected. Move up to 4K and the field does shift about a little bit, but it still delivered very respectable results that sat at the top end of the performance graph. One of the best graphs I want to show you though is the price per frame graph. Now this uses MSRP pricing for the latest graphics cards, as well as current availability pricing for GPUs that have been around for a little while, to determine which GPUs are the best value options right now. Of course, in this graph, lower is better, and it paints a picture of just how much better the 4070 is on a price to performance basis than its overpriced 4070 Ti counterparts, and of course more pricey 4080 and 4090 brothers. It is clear to me that Nvidia have created a fantastic offering in the RTX 4070, a card that delivers truly next-gen performance without any of the price, size, or power consumption drawbacks we've seen from the rest of the 40 series. They've also exposed how ridiculous their RTX 4070 Ti pricing is, a card that no one should now consider buying without a massive price reduction. It does offer a glimmer of hope though for future budget-oriented 40 series design, and throws the ball well and truly in AMD's court to bring out something actually decent for the $500 to $600 price tag. I just really hope cards like these, including the Founders and AIB models, are actually available for anything near MSRP. Good job Nvidia, I think, is sort of the conclusion here. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.